Welcome to Senior Moments. I'm Tommy Ellison. You know, I forget names, car keys, and what I came in the room for, but somehow I remember the 60s with crystal clear clarity. What you are about to hear is evidence of a misspent youth, and believe me, I've got some stories. Let's go. Well, folks, this is Tommy Ellison. It's episode 67 of Senior Moments. It's Sunday night. It's live at 5. And just as I was coming on air, I got a message from Facebook stating that the broadcast was not being uploaded, and I'm not exactly sure what that means. So if you're watching this live, you're probably watching it on YouTube. And my apologies for that, but you know, it's Facebook, so I have no really idea what is going on here. So anyway, with all that said, I'm hoping that I can get past this and work on all this. I'm still having a little bit of issue here with the Facebook deals here. Hang on one second. Let's see if that's going to make a difference. Sorry about this. You know, I was about to tell you as I was logging on, this is episode 67, which is kind of difficult for me to believe. I can't imagine it taking this long to, well, not this long, but just the idea of having this many episodes on the air. So I appreciate those of you who have been watching, and I appreciate your patience with me tonight because I'm having some technical problems here, guys. Having some technical problems. So bear with me. I'm not even sure what I just did there. Back to live mode. Okay, that wasn't what I wanted to do. I need to go to preferences, show program window while in other apps. Well, I don't want to do that. So, okay, guys, this may be one of those nights, I guess. Well, hang on one second. Let me try one other thing here. See if I can get that window back up in business here. And we'll go back to here. Okay. All right. I feel like I need to say timeout. Can I get a mulligan on this one and see what's going on? So, again, if you tried to watch this on YouTube or on Facebook, I don't know what the problem is. It's Facebook, which seems to change the rules about every other day sometimes. So anyway, this is episode 67, I Saw Dead People. If you're watching this live on YouTube, welcome. If you're watching it on Facebook on a replay, welcome. And if you saw the title of the broadcast tonight, it's I Saw Dead People, which I guess is a takeoff of the old movie. I can't remember if that was the name of that movie or if that was just one of the lines. I see dead people. I had a meme once upon a time. I should have pulled that up. It said the little kid on that movie was talking to Bruce Willis, and he said, I see stupid people. And Bruce Willis is replying, welcome to Facebook. So, and there's a lot of truth to that. But anyway, let's get started. Have you ever noticed something strange about kids? And I won't say it's all kids. Maybe it's just the kids I grew up around. I don't know. I grew up in a nice little town called Fairfield. But for whatever reason, if you tell a 10-year-old boy that there's a dead body somewhere, and suddenly all the kids in the neighborhood want to see it. And I don't know if that's totally true or not, but I was one of them. I was always just cautiously curious about, well, funerals and dead people and stuff like that. And so that's why this episode is entitled I Saw Dead People. When I think about, certain childhood curiosities and I always think about that movie that came out. I don't know. I was not a teenager. I was an adult. But the name of the movie was Stand By Me. And I don't know if you remember that movie, but there were 4 boys who were big buds, living in town. And they all had big brothers that harassed them all the time. It was kind of a typical situation of growing up in a small town. But anyway, these 4 boys heard about, through the grapevine, that a dead body was lying out near the railroad tracks several miles out of town. And so, being boys and being adventurous, they just decided they would, pack up and walk out there and see exactly what they could see. And they set off on that adventure just to possibly see a dead body. And I think they knew the person, but I'm not sure of the backstory on that. But anyway, that was kind of like the opening scene plot of the movie. Those guys getting together and deciding to take that little trip to see a dead person. And of course, along the way, and this was part of the plot, they had to, outrun their bully big brothers and all their friends and dodge trains that were coming by, on the tracks that they were walking on, and kind of just face a lot of fear, stranded on a bridge, crossing a bridge with a train coming. And of course, one kid, he was a little, I'd say somebody, how was the expression? The cheese had fallen off his cracker. He was a little out there, and even had a firearm with him that the rest of them were somewhat surprised to find out. But that was the case. And as crazy as that sounds, that whole movie plot, it's really not that unrealistic, because there seems to be something inside young boys, especially. I don't know if I can speak for girls. I'm not one. Don't plan on being one. But, young boys have this desire, I guess, to see a dead body. And, well, it's just a question they ask that, they want to have an answer to. So they want to know, what does a dead person actually look like? And if you haven't ever seen dead people, it's a legitimate question. And back then, almost probably every funeral, and with just a few exceptions, had what was known as an open casket. And you know the drill. The adults, they walked by quietly, talking to the family, paying their respects, looking over into the casket, seeing old Fred or Wilma, and how great, God, they really look good. And they don't. It's that when God takes the spirit of a person, that countenance completely changes. And if you don't know that, you've probably never been to an open casket funeral. So anyway, with all that said, this isn't about mortuary services. But, the children would always, at a funeral, open casket, more or less, peek in. And sometimes their mom or dad made them actually go and look at the body. And sometimes they probably tried to prevent them from going and looking at the body, but the kids decided to do it anyway. So it's kind of been a ritual for, hundreds of years, I guess. And, we're told, as a kid, not to stare, or at least not to stare a long time, and it was just part of a ritual, I guess. And I don't know if that's true beyond the South, it may just be germane to the South. I don't know. I don't know that I've ever been to a funeral away from Alabama, Mississippi. I don't know. Anyway, I don't know what their rituals are. But, the thing about it was, if you were told by your mom or your dad not to stare, of course, you know what happens. That only makes you look longer. And it wasn't disrespect. It was just curiosity more than anything. Trying to understand something that we've never experienced, and yet this person has. And the whole thing about death, Hollywood, they don't help, because I can remember the Saturday afternoon matinees, at the picture show. And yes, I called it a picture show. What did you call it? Movie theater? Maybe. I don't know. But anyway, when you went to the picture show on Saturday afternoon matinee, there were always these featured films like Dracula and Frankenstein and Night of the Living Dead, and, basically movies about dead people coming back to life. And there were other films that featured the dead coming back to life, and there were tons of them. And so that's kind of what we were raised on. And I'm curious, what was the scariest movie that you remember watching as a child where a person came back from the dead? Normally I would ask you to put this in the Facebook comments, but I'm kind of dead in the water on Facebook tonight for whatever reason. So with that said, leave it in the comments when you do have a chance to see it, because I will post this on Facebook as a replay, as you probably know. Anyway, my dad kind of fueled that curiosity for me, and maybe more than he realized, and maybe more than he should have. Because years ago, before forensic pathology became the sophisticated science as it is today, my dad served as a coroner in Jefferson County here in the Birmingham area. And, his job wasn't like solving crimes like you see on CSI and some of those movies. A lot of television shows with pathologists and coroners involved. But many times, and most of the time, he just simply pronounced someone dead as an official coroner and completed the paperwork and tagged the body and then released the body to go to the funeral home, unless there was some reason to believe that there was, foul play involved in the death, and then it would have been sent off to another area for an autopsy. But to me, though, that sounded like the most fascinating job in the world. Now, some of my friends are probably watching this or will watch this, and they'll say, that explains a lot of things about you, Tommy. Anyway, that's another episode. And Dad would tell stories that, most fathers probably wouldn't. And maybe it was just because most fathers weren't coroners, right? And Dad would tell me about, as a deputy sheriff, as a law enforcement officer, solving crimes prior to him being a coroner. He only did the coroner thing for about a year, if I recall, maybe 2. It was kind of a special assignment, I guess you would say. But, he would tell me stories about witnessing executions at Kilby Prison in Alabama. The electric chair down there, it was known as the Yellow Mama, and it was where we executed prisoners there. And apparently he went to them, and he would talk to me about them a little bit, not in morbid sense, but just, what you would have expected to see. And, the movie The Green Mile was probably the best example of how an electric chair really works. So Uh, I don't know. My sister's asking me if it's not playing on YouTube either. So I may wind up having to do a replay here. So anyway, where was I? Anyway, just hearing, the name Yellow Mama in an electric chair, kind of sent my imagination into overdrive. And I'd beg him to take me along, but he always refused for obvious reasons. And years later, I realized he wasn't keeping me from seeing something exciting. He was protecting me from something really probably no child should ever have to see. And that's an execution of another human being. But every time he talked about it, I'd beg him, Daddy, can I go? And the answer was always no. And years later, I understood why. He said it wasn't something that, anyone should see. And, the electricity did strange things to the body, the burns, and the people that were witnessing it would never forget watching it. And so, well, it affected him. Not just the condemned man was affected, but it was, more or less burned into the memory of the families and friends and people that were there to witness the execution. So, of course, hearing these stories only made me more curious. And during the time he was serving as a coroner, my family would oftentimes go down to the Warrior River where my mom's brothers and sisters had built a cabin there years earlier. And so there was like a free vacation spot to spend the week on the Warrior River. It was kind of rustic. You had to take your own water. There was no running water in the cabin. And you say, well, what did you do about call of nature? Well, there was a Johnny house out away from the cabin. Like I said, it was very rustic, but that's where my family would typically go. And my dad would spend his vacation time there with us. My mom would arrange to be off at the same time. And so we would go down to the river and spend about a week there. And he would fish and teach us how to fish, and had a motorboat. We would ski. And this one particular time, my cousin Lee and I spent a week there together. He came with us, that just being social, one of my cousins. He was a little older than me, I think about 2 years older than me. But we spent a week together with Mom and Dad on this family vacation on the Warrior River, my cousin Lee and I. And in reality, it wasn't just going down to the river cabin that my mom family owned and spending the week. It was pretty rustic, like I said, but you had to take the water. You had to take your own soap, and of course, there was no running water to a bathtub, so we bathed in the river. Got a bar of ivory soap. You only use ivory in the river because it floats. The rest of them sink. But anyway, we would bathe and soap up and on the pier and jump back in to rinse off. And so it was kind of like Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn on the Warrior River, I guess, except we didn't build a raft. Anyway, tip for the wise: if you ever have to take a bath in the river, don't use anything but ivory. Okay, I mean, you'll lose a regular bar of soap in a heartbeat. It'll go to the bottom every time. But anyway, I digress. But being a coroner for the county, Dad was always on call. And one night while we were down at the river, he got a call on his car radio requiring him to go down the river for really only about a mile and a half from where we were, and write a death certificate on a woman who had drowned. And I seem to recall she had been drinking heavily and thought she could swim across the slough that the cabin was located on, but, well, failed to make it. And we begged my dad to go with him. And, well, eventually he broke down and he took us, but he made us sit in the back seat of his squad car while he walked down to the pier on the river to examine the body and to do his job. And naturally, we waited for him to get out of sight, and then we climbed out of the car and headed down to the river. And there was a bunch of people standing around, and we just kind of tried to blend in, but our objective was pretty clear. We wanted to see a dead woman who had drowned in the river that we swam in. I mean, this was good stuff. This was a story that we would tell at school for many years. So anyway, we did see her, and she was lying on a pier waiting for, the authorities to arrive. And I don't know, I can't remember. I don't recall her being covered up. She was just laying on the pier there wearing her bathing suit. And neither of us knew exactly what we were about to see. We just kind of stood there gawking and quiet and trying to process the reality that someone who had been alive only hours before was now completely still, completely gone. And I'm not sure what we thought we were going to see. It was pretty normal. I mean, in the sense of a woman lying on the pier in a one-piece bathing suit, but just like any other sunbather that we'd ever seen for X number of times. The one thing I do remember, though, is that she was white as a hotel sheet, and her eyes were open. Well, at least one of them. That was all we could see from our vantage point. And I remember she had a big nose, which is maybe why we couldn't see that other eye now that I think about it. But anyway, I don't remember much more about it other than the fact that my mother, when we got back to the cabin, was, as they say in the country, mad as a wet hen that my dad had let us see that body. He really had nothing to do with it. We were the culprits, other than maybe providing the transportation down there. And he told us to stay in the car, but we were the ones committing the crime. And if you consider satisfying our curiosity, well, I guess you would call that committing the crime. And then there was a day when my dad came home from his coroner's job, and he opened the trunk of his car, and there in the trunk was a box. It wasn't toys, like I suspected, I guess. And they weren't tools. No, they were bones, human bones. And they weren't connected. They were just pieces, disjointed arm bones, leg bones, and, of course, the skull. And what kid isn't drawn to a human skull? Anyway, he needed to store them overnight there and take them back to work because the courthouse apparently had closed and he wouldn't be able to get to where he was going inside the courthouse. So he brought them home. And so he told me, he said, I can't leave these in the car, squad car. Not sure why. I guess he was afraid somebody might steal them. So he had a solution. And this was my dad. My dad was a big practical joker. I probably should have made that clear earlier. A big-time practical joker. And so he told me he wanted to put the box of bones underneath my bed overnight. I mean, he was kidding, but I didn't know that. at the time he said it. And I was picturing him sliding that box underneath my bed and saying, "Sweet dreams, son." And I mean, in my mind, there would be nothing quite like sleeping over a box of human skeleton parts. And I obviously objected. And he didn't slide the box underneath my bed, nor did he make me sleep over them as he was kidding me about. But he got the rise out of me that he was looking for. And, you know, being a coroner, he had a lot of books that he kept there at the house, and they weren't actually out in the open much. But one day I found some of them. They were books about criminal pathology that he had more or less hidden, not so much hidden, but just they weren't very obvious. You had to go looking for a book to find them, which was not really something I did much of. And you can tell from my grades that would be true. But anyway, he said, I'm guessing he was hiding them, you know, from my baby sister and me. But, you know, being a curious kid, I found them. And wow, page after page contained photographs of accident victims, burn victims, and people whose lives have ended in tragic ways. I probably shouldn't have looked. This was on me. Now, you can say all you want to about my dad, but I love my dad, and he loved me, and I guess he enabled me to be an adult in a special sort of way. But, you know, once you open a book like that, it's hard to stop turning the pages. And all of the words were way over my head. But the pictures, well, let's just say they were amazing to me, a kid. And that experience kind of stayed with me longer than any of the other events that happened until one night when Dad took me to a morgue. Now, here's the deal. It was an older morgue. This wasn't the brightest, you know, funeral home that I've ever been in. It was a morgue for black folks, and I'll say it was in an African American section in Birmingham. So the majority of the bodies, if not all of them, because I didn't peek under all the sheets, were black men or women. And for those of you who've ever been around a black funeral, you'll know that there are situations that exist sometimes where the funeral home, I'm trying to be nice with this, the funeral home would hold the body out and keep it from being buried until the bills were paid. Just reality of business, I guess, in that part of the city. And so if they couldn't immediately afford the burial, the bodies that were needing to be buried there, you know, they would remain there in the morgue until arrangements were made and you know, the bills were paid. And the room, let's just say it was dimly lit. My recollection was there was a single light bulb, you know, like 100-watt light bulb suspended from a long cord from the ceiling that was hanging about 12 or 15 feet above the floor, and it had no shade on it, no reflectors. It had no way of diffracting the light, you know, or is it refracting? Whatever. It didn't shine in multiple directions. It was just kind of a hard, cold 100-watt light bulb hanging from the ceiling. And that was the only illumination that was in the room. And I don't know exactly how or why, but it seemed like because of the rafters in the room, it would cast shadows, on the wall. So punchline here, it was kind of a spooky room, especially for me, because I'm probably 10, 11. And the bodies were resting on wooden shelves, and each of them were covered by a white sheet, and there were just rows of bodies. And it felt like I had walked into another world. I mean, if you've ever seen the movie The Sixth Sense, you'll remember the little boy saying, "I see dead people." Well, guess what? That night, I saw a room full of them. Now, Dad, he was identifying this new contribution to the collection they had in an adjacent room, and so he more or less left me standing there in the morgue. I guess he didn't want me to see that body for whatever reason, because probably it was lying on the table. It might have even been subject to an autopsy at that point. But anyway, he told me to stay in the room where all of the other bodies were collecting. And so I stayed behind, trying to act brave. And then it happened. There was a long, low, moaning sound that came from one of the bodies, and I froze. And suddenly, every Dracula, Frankenstein, wolf man with two brains horror movie I'd ever imagined came rushing into my head. I was convinced that somebody in that room had just come back to life. Well, Dad walked back in. I guess he could tell I was white as a sheet. And he looked at me and he smiled, and I told him I thought I had heard this sound, this moaning sound. And I know he saw that I was scared, because I had, like I said, turned white as a drowned woman on a river pier. And he quietly explained what I had just heard. He told me as rigor mortis begins to set into a human body and the muscles begin to tighten, that any trapped air that's still in the lungs of the deceased is there. It can be forced out. And of course, when it's forced out, from the lungs and across the vocal cords and out of the mouth. And in essence, the body hadn't spoken. Nature had. And guess what? Knowing the explanation didn't make it any less spooky. I mean, I don't think I ever forgot that sound. And looking back now, I realized all those experiences, the woman on the pier, the time in the morgue, the bones in the box, all those experiences was teaching me, and it was this, that death was no longer some mysterious fairy tale, it's real. And it comes to every family. It comes to every person, every neighborhood, every generation. And as strange as my childhood experience, may sound today, it kind of slowly taught me a lesson the Bible has already been teaching for thousands of years, that life is temporary. And every one of us has an appointment we cannot cancel. And as I grew older, I realized something my 10-year-old mind could have probably never have understood, that death is not the end of the story. you probably know this, but it bears repeating. The Bible tells us that every one of us will one day leave this world, but it also tells us that God never intended death to have the final word. And that's why he sent his son, Jesus Christ. The cross wasn't just about his death. It was about his victory over death. And his resurrection is God's promise that everyone who places their faith in Christ can have the assurance of eternal life. And if there's one thing these childhood memories taught me, it's this: life is precious, but life is brief, and eternity is real. So let me ask you a question. If your journey ended today, do you know where yours would continue? You don't have to wonder, because God loves you more than you can imagine. And he offers forgiveness through Jesus Christ, and he invites you into a relationship that begins here on earth and lasts forever. Do you believe that? My prayer is that you'll know him, not just someday, but today. Because when you know Christ, death isn't the end. It's simply the doorway home. God blesses you, and he will continue to bless you. And we don't, as believers, don't die. We just have a homecoming. So, my sister chimed in here, it looks like. I know that she was telling me earlier on a message, in a text message, that she wasn't getting the message. She says here, I'm not sure he was hiding them from me, as he later showed me photos he kept from a murder scene. Well, maybe at the time, that he had those books. I don't remember I don't think you were around when he was a coroner, but you could tell me more about that if the time came. Anyway, listen, God bless you. Sorry for the technical troubles. And if you're watching still the Facebook deal, I don't know, it went askew. It's on YouTube. I'm not sure how you watch it, but I'm going to, when we finish this, I'll pull this off and post it on Facebook for those who want to watch the replay. But in the meantime, man, God bless you, and I'll see you next time for another edition of Senior Moments. Well, hey, thanks for spending a few minutes with me on Senior Moments. If you enjoyed the ride, be sure and tap that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. I'll be back soon with more stories from a misspent youth, and maybe some of yours too.